This is Pod Strangely Warmed, a place where we tell the good Methodist story, where we have conversations that invite followers of Jesus to seek after that loving, just, and free world that God imagines for us all, and have a little fun along the way. Hi, and welcome to Pod Strangely Warmed. I'm Daniel Hawkins, and today on this live episode, we are so excited to be talking about the topic of discipleship, where it meets us in our journeys individually and collectively. But before we get started in an amazing conversation today, I want to take a minute to thank the folks at United Methodist Communications and Resource UMC for including Pod Strangely Warmed, your local Methodist nerd podcast, at least local if you're in Central Texas, on the Podcast-A-Thon. Today has been a great opportunity for us to be connected as connectional people with podcasts from across the worldwide United Methodist Church. Today, joining me as we talk about discipleship here in Central Texas is Allison Alvarado from First United Methodist Church in Fort Worth. She's the executive director. That's a title.
All the catch-all jobs.
Or all the catch-all jobs. Okay. One of the things you have as a part of your catch-all is work with the Healthy Plate Discipleship Initiative. You're the ambassador of that group, one of our better functioning discipleship pathways and thought processes here in the Central Texas Conference. Also joining us today is Marcus Jones. Marcus is at the UTA Wesley Foundation. He is the executive director of the UTA Wesley Foundation, which also is a bit of a catch-all, right?
It is.
All administration, all pastoring, all the time.
All the things.
Okay. Well, I am thankful that you are here, both of you, with us on the podcast today. Discipleship is near and dear to our hearts, both here in Central Texas, here on Pod Strangely Warmed, and here as followers of Jesus Christ, right? Yeah. It's part of what we've been tasked with doing again and again and again. And one of the ways that has been framed for us here locally in Central Texas in the last 18 months is to wrestle with the question, how are we being good ancestors for those who come after us? And I think with intentionality, forming disciples, helping those who come after us be formed as disciples and forming ourselves as disciples is one of the ways that we can be incredible ancestors for those who are coming after us. First Fort Worth does a really good job of helping your community, and I think us as a conference understand what discipleship can look like. Allison, can you unpack for us a little bit what Healthy Plate looks like and how it functions within the life of your local church?
Sure. So lots of credit to Reverend Casey Orr, who developed the program. So hopefully she's listening in. When she was, I think in her early time at First Fort Worth, she really wanted to develop a discipleship program, a framework really for discipleship. What I really love about it is that it's so accessible and it's something that you can kind of wrap your head around. Yeah. And it's based on 6 spiritual practices. Okay. And they are worship, pray, give, learn, serve, and play.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Play. And that was added kind of at the end when the church realized fellowship is a big part of this.
For sure.
Community is a big part of this. So that has to be one of the spiritual practices.
Absolutely.
And so we've designed that framework and, under Casey's inspiration to really even organize the way that we do ministry in a lot of ways, but it's kind of core to what we do at First Church. But we also talk about it on a more practical level and, really dig into it as well. So I know we'll talk about that probably a little bit later, but it's really just designed as a framework, a way to really think about discipleship in ways that are easy to digest and to bite into.
I think
Healthy Plate,
Healthy Plate by,
what
I'm glad that play made it on to the list because that means there's hope for brisket on the plate.
That's what
right? We got some good barbecue opportunities here on the plate.
Amen. Let's go.
Let's do it. It's Texas, right? We got to have barbecue. Life is pretty good.
Absolutely.
Marcus, as you hear those 6 spiritual practices, which ones do you see intersecting with your students and with the kind of the framework for what you're doing with your students on a day in and day out basis?
I actually love all of them. We have kind of similar pathway, discipleship pathway. We call it the 4H pathway. And those 4 H's stand for hanging out, hanging in, hands in, and hands out. Okay. And essentially it's a cyclical kind of way in which we invite people into our community to be discipled. We understand that in college ministry, the majority of what we do is hanging out. And we hang out well. So that play element is primary for us.
Yeah.
And we try to emphasize that in all areas of what we do. And so although we do worship and we have Bible study and we have other gatherings, we really just want to hang out, and we want to invite people to hang out with us. And the more you hang out with us, you decide to hang in with us. You start to make this your space for discipleship, for community, and for gathering. And as you hang out and hang in, you start to put your hands in, because discipleship is based on community. We can't do it without community, and we can't do it without individuals putting their hands in for the work of our community. And ultimately, as you put your hands in, you work with us as we put our hands out into our larger community. So we're building our internal community, which is our church and our ministry, but we are a part of a larger community, and discipleship happens both inside of our church and inside of our community, but it's also a part of what's happening on the outside of us. And so this is our 4-H pathway, and this is how we kind of engage, hanging out in all facets of what we do in such a way where we build disciples for the transformation of our community and our world.
So love that. And I love that in each way we've talked about discipleship in a way that's holistic, right? Whether we're hanging out and hanging in, or we're putting our hand in and then a hand out, whether we've got not a full plate, but a healthy plate,
a balanced plate,
a balanced plate.
Yes.
Each one is an invitation to experience practice. And each one of the practices I heard you lift up, right, is one we can experience individually, but also, and perhaps for many of them, at their best, communally, right? As United Methodist nerds, right? We are people of personal holiness and social holiness, right? It's got to be both. And as you guys have experienced folks trying to navigate their way through this journey, right? Where is the hiccup for most people along the way? You know, when you invite people to kind of a healthy plate of discipleship, where does that hiccup show up for them? And where are you invited as, you know, ministers of the gospel, right? All of us on church staffs are invited to come alongside folks so that they are equipped for the work of ministry, but also for their own growth. Where do you see maybe some folks stubbing a toe or having a hiccup along the way?
You know, there are two ways I see. I think one is you got to make it accessible. You know, sometimes when you talk about discipleship, especially if you're not, you know, sort of churchy, right? It's kind of it might be a scary word. And, you know, well, what does that mean? And so just making it accessible and not something that seems kind of unachievable or something that I can't participate in unless I do certain things, which leads me to the other thing, which is it's not I'm supposed to. Because if you make it, you know, to be a good Christian, discipleship's a big part of it. So I'm supposed to go to Bible study. I'm supposed to do these things. And so I think that what's really important to promoting and inspiring discipleship is to break those barriers down.
Yeah. That obligation, right?
That was the word that was in my head, obligatory. We make it an obligation instead of an opportunity. And when it's an opportunity, you can take it or you can leave it. And that's kind of what we emphasize in hanging out, because we want you to know that this is no pressure, low pressure. But as you find your footing, as you find yourself included in the community, then you find other pathways to be a part of where you're strengthened, where you're doing it at your liking, your strength, your convenience, your graces. And so you're right, like not making it seem like you have to do this, but here's an invitation into how we will form together.
Moving from obligation to opportunity. Yeah. As you guys are talking, my brain can't help spark back. I'm going to have a seminary nerd moment for a second. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're with you.
You know, for many years, we've all heard the Great Commission, right? Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? We hear that call, right? And the promise attached to it, right? And then that Christ will be with us till the end of the age, right? Go therefore is an imperative, right? It feels like it's got an obligation attached to it. But some of the most recent kind of linguistic scholarship in the Greek there says we might better understand it as you are going, make disciples. And that flipped for me when that was one of, you talking about the aha moments in your life. That was one of those flip aha moments, right? Because the go therefore involves like obligation. It involves I have to go and somehow take Jesus with me rather than assuming Jesus is already doing stuff right here in our midst. Our job is to sort of have eyes to see and to jump in alongside and join in the party, right? And so that flip of as we are going, right? It's not an obligation. It's not a supposed to. It's inherent within hanging out and figuring it out along the way. It's such a wonderful kind of invitation here, right?
Mm-hmm.
As we go,
Absolutely.
make disciples.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot as well, because I think historically we have put a lot of pressure on people. The Great Commission has put the way we've interpreted the Great Commission has put a lot of pressure on people, and young people feel it, I think, even more, because the thing that they're hearing, especially in our spaces and United Methodist spaces, that they're going to be the saviors of our institutions, and like that's a lot of pressure when you have to go do it. But what does it look like when we get to invite people to join us? What does it look like that we present opportunities for people to go alongside of us, to go with us, as opposed to us thinking that the mandate is on us to go?
Right.
But no, we're all moving somewhere, and sometimes we're all moving in the same direction without knowing we're all going in the same direction. And so when we become cognizant of that, we invite others to go with us, because we know that the journeys are easier when you got somebody going with you, as opposed to you thinking that you have to go do it yourself.
There's language that we use in our church community and in our context, and it applies to discipleship, but I would say it's just an invitation to any kind of life within the church. What we say is, we don't want this from you. We want it for you.
Yeah.
And that's another kind of, I think, flip that really changes the way that you look at things, so that it takes that obligation away.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and in all facets of discipleship, generosity was one of y'all's 6 spiritual practices. I don't know if generosity was the word y'all used for it.
It starts with a G. You're close.
Okay,
Give.
giving. Okay, there we go. Close.
We
It's
like
one of
short
the G
words.
Okay. That is one of those places where often that if obligation is going to show up, right, it shows up attached to giving, right? Well, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what grandma told me to do. This is what mom said, you do this or I'm going to whack you in the back of the head, right? But how much is our life different when we're living in a right relationship to the financial resources of our lives, right? When we think of all, how many marital fights have come from a place of financial, not even if it's not financial struggle, over financial things, right? And if giving is part of the foundation of living in a right relationship with our stuff, right? So it's not primary in our lives. I want that for my people, right? I've walked with people through the struggle of, we bought a house and 2 cars and have 2.4 kids, and we signed up for every bit of debt that they said we qualified for, right? And now all of a sudden we are swimming in it, and we are upside down, and we are stressed to all ends. And we often think of that as a counseling thing, but that's a thing where discipleship meets people's everyday life, right? And for that family, it's going to be a 5-year journey toward a place of health, right? You can't fix that overnight. But that's where we as Methodists, I think, have a helpful framework for discipleship, right? We're journey people, not aha moment people, right? I grew up in Waco, and so I still root for my Bears, sick 'em.
Y'all having a tough time right now.
I know. But we just had the biggest comeback in school history. Now, it means we were down by 28 points in one game, but we scored the last 29. So, but living in Waco, growing up in the shadow of Baylor, going to Baylor, right? I was surrounded by a community where the religiosity was very much of, can you name the moment you got saved, right? It was a singular, momentary kind of approach to things. And here I am, a good Methodist boy, going, huh? Help me understand. It's like, well, I was here, and then I got here, and I had an aha moment here, and I've grown here, and I can look back and see I'm not the person I was before. We are people of the journey, right? We have those aha moments. It's not as though we're just sort of sitting on the couch the whole time and praying God does something without our action and our engagement and the Spirit meeting us in the midst of that. But that journey is more than just a singular aha, right? And for folks in every step of our discipleship, whether it's giving or anywhere else, we actually have a gift to give to people and something we want for them when this spirit of we're people of the journey can meet them in the midst of that discipleship. I wonder, when you think about the 4 H's, when you think about the 6 practices, we at Martin are still developing our pathway, but I'm stuck on 3 B's right now. We're creating communities of belonging, believing, and becoming, right? That kind of a framework of we begin in the hanging out, right? We begin in that place of belonging. that leads ultimately to believing or a deeper believing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So that we might become who it is that God is inviting us to become, right? That sanctifying grace alive and at work in the midst of that. But I'm curious for you guys as practitioners of this day in and day out. Do you ever have moments where people get stuck in one of the 4 H's, or to get, lean too far into one of the 6 spiritual practices? I heard you mention the word balanced earlier, right?
Absolutely.
And what would you invite people to in that kind of space?
Well, we're in college ministry, which is extraordinarily transient. So there's always movement. And one of the things that we remind ourselves is that, and the reason why we call it a pathway, because we know this, people get on pathways at different points. So although it seems as if it starts with hanging out, some people may jump in right at hands in or hands out,
Right.
And so we want to make sure that no matter where people join along the pathway, we are cool with where they are, and there's no pressure to go anywhere else. So we talk about all of the things that we do at the Wesley in terms of community. So we don't do programs because you can't program people, or you shouldn't be trying to program people.
That's some dystopian sci-fi book there, right? How do we program the people? We've been reading The Hunger Games with my oldest, and she's 12, and so it's right in her, and she's like, "What is this? And what is happening?" And she's like, "Yeah, welcome to dystopian literature. You're supposed to have that reaction."
Well, sometimes churches do get in the habit of trying to program people along a particular ideology or way of thinking. And so we call ours community because we want our students to know that whether you only come to the fun stuff or whether you come to Bible study on Wednesdays or Tuesday night worship, or even just dinner that happens before worship, where you show up and eat and leave,
Right.
that is your community. That is your community of discipleship along this path.
What Marcus is not saying is that hurts his soul just a little bit when you come and eat and then leave. But there's room enough at the no.
Well, but interesting enough, so one of the things that we did this year is that it did bother us a little bit that individuals would come to dinner and then leave, but we weren't helping. We had a particular setup that almost promoted leaving because we would turn the room as it was time for worship, because we're space capped, and so we do all things in one space. And so the students came to me and said, "Hey, we probably need to stop doing that, because we're actually saying, hey, it's okay to leave. We want to invite you to stay, not an invitation to depart." And so, but even those things are looking at how people exist in community within our community and saying it's okay if that's where you are, and that's okay if that's where you want to stay, because we understand that on this pathway you could be there longer than you want to, or you can move along. And it's that journeying with people as they enter into our communities. And I think a lot of times we've pressured people to move along. You've been at church this long, why are you still there? Because this is where I'm getting what I need, or this is where I'm being filled, as opposed to saying, no, you need to be hitting all of these markers. And so I think sometimes in our discipleship approaches, we tend to think we have to move people along, and the community moves people along as people get comfortable in different spaces or different phases of what we're offering.
As you're talking about moving things along, discipleship is not linear, and it's easy to say that, but I think people do think, oh, well, I'm supposed to do this, and then this and this, I'm supposed to check these boxes. This is what discipleship means. And I think the truth is it is a journey. And wherever you are in your life, even if it's a starting point, a midpoint, or, in a very mature point in your discipleship, it changes. And what speaks to you and what fills you up spiritually changes. And we do talk about a balance in healthy plate discipleship. And, usually when people are sort of entering this conversation, worship, which is one of the practices, is on your plate already. And it may be taking up a big part of your plate. Right. And there's not a whole lot of room for the other things. And so, we say, all right, that's fine. And we're not saying more. It's not about more. It's about what could you do to move things around a little bit, add a little bit more to your plate, especially those areas where if you do kind of a self-reflection, maybe I'm not doing that. So in my personal journey, I was one of those people. I started, worship was the big one, right? I go every Sunday and I'm doing good, right? And then, but there's other practices, and probably the one that I was the weakest in or didn't have the most practice in was prayer.
Yeah.
And that was several years ago. Well, now I work on a church staff. And prayer is pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, we're
Yeah.
we're good at that. And I've really, worked to sort of move into that area. Worship is it's a very different experience for me.
Yeah.
It's very hard for me to worship at my church where I work.
Yeah.
And so that has changed. And 2 to 5 years from now, it's going to change again.
Absolutely.
Something else is going to be happening in my life where, I need to sort of lean into something else. So that balance is really designed to work within that journey.
Yeah.
And, what's working for you and where do you need to add some things to kind of fill you up a little bit?
Absolutely.
Well, and that speaks to each unique season, right? It's not a linear journey. We experience it in seasons, right? Each one speaks to us in a new way. Each one pushes us in a new way, right? And this is, one of the joking things in preacher circles is, forever and ever, every Methodist preacher, when they moved from appointment to appointment, had about 4 years of sermons, and they just drug the file with them from one place to the next. And like, I've strongly resisted that because I'm a different person and I'm in a different space, right? This summer we did a series called If I Only Had One Sermon to Preach, right? And the premise is you only get one, right? And if you had one thing to say, what is that going to be, right? I've preached that series 4 times in 4 different churches.
Yeah.
And the sermon's different every time.
Single
Yeah.
time.
Because in the journey, we're in a different place. And in the journey, the Spirit's speaking in a different way. And approaching discipleship in a way that gives yourself freedom, right? To avoid some of the shouldas and couldas,
Yes.
right? Or supposed tos, right? Yes, you've been a Sunday school class teacher for the last 47 years. Maybe for this season, that is not the thing that is feeding your soul anymore, right? Maybe you need to talk to one of these people called a spiritual director where they do some one-on-one mentorship with you and help you along the journey, right? Maybe it's you've been hanging out for a long time. Maybe part of your job now, not job, that I'm messing up the whole thing, right? Maybe for your soul, right?
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
you need is to move from receiving space to creating space.
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
How do you help shift somebody in that journey and along that way?
Well, and that's the interesting thing that we've discovered in all of the year plus that I've been a part of this community is that discipleship happens in community. And as you build relationship in community, your relationship with that community changes. And so for us, your relationship with where you are on the pathway will change. Sometimes not even because you made a conscious choice, but
Right.
you've been hanging out long enough. You didn't even realize that you've been actually putting your hands out. We actually had a student who really just came for worship. But over the course of the year, he had invited more people to worship than anybody else.
Okay.
In addition to that, everything that he was doing on campus, he had the Wesley's name on that table or in those spaces. And so he was taking what we do outside without even realizing it.
Yeah.
He just thought he was hanging out with us. And he even said it when we gave him the hanging out award at the end of the semester. And he was like, wait a minute. And I said, yeah, remember when this came up and you invited us to do that outside of the campus? And when this came up and you said, hey, I mentioned the Wesley at this place. Like all of those is what you thought you were just hanging out here, but you're actually allowing us to grow into our community. And so I think that when discipleship happens in community, people move along the pathway without even knowing it.
Yeah.
But seasonally, their hearts will be changed according to how they've lived into the community. And I think that's one of the amazing things about discipleship.
Well, and one of the things that also happens in community is not only do people move in that, but when we're in community, right, we can do self-assessment, right? We can say, this is where I'm at and be invited to grow, right, internally. But we sometimes also see people see gifts and graces in us, see opportunities in us, see the Spirit at work in us in a way we wouldn't see otherwise. And that helps us take that next step. That helps us try that new practice. That helps us, experience something in a more holistic way. Speaking of holistic, right? Before we get too far down the plate, I love Healthy Plate because I love food. I love to eat. I'm a good old Texas boy. I'm a little hungry right now. They gave us the lunchtime live podcast today.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Resource UMC folks. Come on. Actually, thank you for having us on. We're very happy to be here representing Central Texas. But this idea of the healthy plate, right? It is one that I think is really easy for people to latch onto, right?
Digestible.
It's digestible. Bing, bing. Dustin, do we have a live drum kit here? No? Okay. But it is digestible, right? And it gives people an invitation into each different thing. Have you ever experienced moments where people lean like too far in to any one particular practice, right? Or feel like they get stuck there and they need the invitation of the community to, hey, I love, that you're giving $8 million a year to the church. That's fantastic, but we don't see you. We just see the checks, right? Lance isn't going to have that conversation with somebody, I don't think.
I don't think any of us will.
No.
Like,
Stay right there.
Let's yes,
Whatever you want.
let's yes and this. Let's yes and. But you get the point, right?
Yeah.
Where you're invited, how community has helped people take that next step in their journey, or helped you as a, you mentioned the guy inviting the Wesley into spaces that you weren't going to be otherwise, that maybe helped the community as a whole see something more fully than it wasn't seeing on its own.
I'll use myself as an example. I mentioned before that when I kind of first started my healthy plate assessment and journey, I was really light on prayer. I really didn't have a practice there. And I needed a lot of help just kind of thinking about what that looks like, and what it feels like. And one of the things that we do, we have about 4 times a year, my husband and I lead a healthy plate breakfast.
Okay.
We learned that if you call it a healthy plate class, a discipleship class, no one's going to come. But if you say it's a breakfast, they'll come.
You got plate. I mean, if you called it greasy plate breakfast, it'd probably get, but.
I need to get a piece of paper and then take a note. That's pretty good.
Promise bacon. And, no.
But what's one of the wonderful things about that, people get really vulnerable. And it's a community setting. But we share with each other, where would you say you're light? Where are you good? And then we just start talking about what are some ways that this practice comes to life for you.
Yeah.
And especially outside of Sunday, where discipleship's a lot easier on Sunday than it is on Thursday.
Yeah.
Right. And so we go around and it's amazing. I love doing that breakfast and I do bring a piece of paper and a pen, because every single time someone has said something that I've not thought about.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to prayer, like they'll say, oh, well, I go for a walk in nature, or here's some things that I do, or meditation, or, listening to a piece of music that really moves me. And they just share these things, and they're so relatable.
Yeah.
Right. And so that just sort of generates all this discussion, and it sort of inspires people to say, oh, kind of like you're saying, you sort of accidentally fall into it. Oh, I'm doing discipleship and I didn't even know it.
Right. Yeah. And it's Tuesday.
Tuesday. Isn't that great?
I love your point. Discipleship's easy on Sunday, or on
Tuesday
when worship is your primary activity, right? So many of us as good church people are good at being in that churchy zone in whatever our official church day is, right? Yeah. But our true growth happens when it becomes a holistic life thing, right? And that invitation from the breakfast, right, is to experience that day by day and pushing that out into our lived experience each and every day, right? Where have y'all had a moment, either within your community or personally, where the call of discipleship has caught you in the middle of a week, right? Whether that's to have a hard conversation that you're like, man, I really don't want to have this, but there's an invitation inherent within the Spirit, or a moment where through part of your community, you're given eyes to see something going on within your broader community in a different way, right? That helps you embody the gospel, not just with words, but in action, and seeking justice along the way. Have y'all experienced one of those moments where discipleship pushing outside of our primary, we're going to call it Sunday, call it Tuesday, space, invites you kind of to deeper community transformation?
Well, we're in that right now.
Okay.
So I've shared with a lot of our churches where I when I get to speak to them, the UTA Wesley is in a very unique place, location wise, in terms that the ministry is to college students, and on the front side of our space is the university and all of its prosperity and glory and diversity. But on the back side of our space is poverty and the realities of what it looks like to live in a community that has become increasingly more of an entertainment district, which causes displacement, which increasing poverty exists. And then on the backside of our space is an organization that serves, what I often call the underbelly of our society, the part of our society that we try to look past when we pull up to the stoplight or act like it doesn't exist in our spaces. And I wasn't even at our space longer than a month before we had an unhoused neighbor on our porch, on our door. And that really began to push me to ask the question, yes, I know that we are a college ministry and we are a ministry that is supposed to disciple college students. But what does it look like for us to be a part of this larger community? And one of the ways I believe God has really allowed us to do that is that there are some children in a housing community across the street from us. And these young people and all of their glory and beautiful godliness has challenged us to be more invitational to the community around us. And so what a lot of our students found to be the safe space for college students is now becoming a safe space for these kids that live in this low income housing community across the street. And it really has allowed us to think about, where does our community fit on our pathway? Where does our community fit in our discipleship? And how do we feel about something that typically has gone ignored in our space? To now we have to be invitational and have the opportunity to be invited into their spaces because we are also a part of that community. And that has really allowed us to do some soul work as it relates to how do we also do work with college students and create disciples in this space. But as they are being formed, how are they a part of this larger community that is underprivileged and underserved? And what is their role and responsibility in that? And how are they being formed and stretched in that? And it has created a lot of really fun but challenging, opportunities for us because we're trying to figure out what that looks like. And so that is a recent thing. And as we prepare disciples in our community, how are we allowing them to see that discipleship also means service outside of our space and being in community outside of our space? So it's been challenging, but yet exciting opportunity we have.
That is. And I know you guys are wrestling with or beginning to wrestle with that balance of meeting, discipleship pushing us outside of ourselves to our neighbors, right? To meet momentary needs, but also to begin to wrestle with big picture causal issues. If Desmond Tutu's quote, right? How many times are we going to pull somebody out of the river before we go upstream and figure out why they're falling in to begin with and begin to address that upstream?
Right.
Where is this meeting you guys right now?
Well, I think we have a lot of ministry that does serve vulnerable people, people experiencing homelessness, for example. And, I think that we do a great job of that. And we have a lot of really committed volunteers that help with that. And it is a lot like what you're saying. There's a sort of a reflection point and some discernment work to be done on, are we treating sort of acute issues as they present themselves to us? Or are we looking at the chronic issue that's really underlying it? And can we do both?
Right.
Because I think we do a pretty good job of being responsive.
Right.
And it's fulfilling and it's important work. It needs to be done. But also, what could we do that made that not even be necessary? And it's not something that we could just solve on our own, but how do we work in community, with others, with our neighbors, with partners, whoever, to really try to, get at those underlying issues to help make a transformation truly happen.
Well, I love the intentionality of that, right? And the expansiveness, right? It's not just we're going to put our Superman cape on at the church and go fly in and fix something, right? But to engage the community, to be partners along the way, right? In many ways, that particular expression of our discipleship is the same kind of, requires the same intentionality and thought that went into the forming of the healthy plate to begin with, or the forming of the 4-H's, right? We got to zoom out so that we can engage in a meaningful way, right? To ask the hard questions, right? Not only where are we, but how do we get here, right? Discipleship pathways became the rage in the United Methodist Church because after an extended period of time, we looked around and go, we say we're making disciples of Jesus Christ, but we're making good church people. And how do we make sure that we, we're not against good church people, right?
We need them.
We need them. But how do we yes and that, right? How are we forming disciples who also happen to be good church people, right? It's where it's that invitation there. As you guys, it sounds like you're in the beginning stages of some pretty similar work here, right?
Sounds like it.
Pushing into the neighborhood, getting to know the individuals and the community partners that help you not just be, what you are on paper, but that transforming agent of Christ in the world, an ambassador of grace in the midst of what you're doing. What encouragement would you give the folks who are joining with us online or listening to this after the fact as they are wrestling with, as I look around my community, maybe who am I not seeing, right? That I might have be invited to see, or what, where have I just gotten stuck in a pattern of behavior that needs to hit pause and examine a little further? What invitation would you give to folks who might find themselves in that place?
I would say start with who is our neighbor? Who is our neighbor? Is it the people that come to church with us every day? Is it the people that live near the church? Who is our neighbor? And I think once you define that, then get to know your neighbors. And because if you go without knowing that and building those relationships and say, I'm here to help, that's not going to fly.
Right.
That's not going to fly at all. You're not going to get a good response from that.
Yeah.
So start slow and start with the questions that you really need to sort of step back, like you said, and figure out, what is our work here? What is our work here? Because we can't do everything, and we can do a lot of things well, but we can't do all of them.
Right.
So, just be methodical. We're Methodists. We can do that, right?
we should have that. People, yes.
We should do that.
Yes.
And don't feel like you have to solve the world's problems. Maybe just work on your backyard a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, very similarly, I just say, hey, find a place to hang out. Find a place where you're comfortable hanging in community. And the rest will find its way to you, and you'll find your place in that work. But just find a place to hang out. Find a place that satisfies you, that gives you joy, that gives you hope. And as you get into that place, into that community, you'll begin to find your ways where you put your hands in, or where you become more of a place where you hang in and not where you're just hanging out, just to use our language. But just find a place to hang out. I mean, I think that's what everyone is craving anyway. A place to go hang and be and exist, to use some of your language. Yeah. And so just find a place to be. And as you find a place to be, you'll find invitations into discipleship, into community.
If there's anything that's truly universal, especially after a period of time when we could not be together for a while, being together has been so important to everyone. Yeah. Regardless of where you are on your discipleship journey, your spiritual journey. It has just been so highlighted and so elevated, that need for community. So I totally agree. Just start with hanging out. I love that, and good things will happen from there.
Absolutely.
Start hanging out.
Just start hanging out. Have some brisket.
Right. Have some brisket. Cherish the people around you. Right.
Indeed.
Amen. Thank you for joining us today on Pod Strangely Warm from Central Texas. We are thankful that you have joined with us, and we want to say once again, thank you to the folks at Resource UMC and United Methodist Communications for including us in the Podcast-A-Thon of all Podcast-A-Thons. We said it, therefore it must be true. Until next time, I'm Daniel Hawkins. This has been Pod Strangely Warmed. If you enjoyed our conversation today, know that you can find us anywhere you find podcasts. On Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, any and all the places, we are there. So if you want to continue the good United Methodist conversation that you've been a part of today, find us, like us, rate us, review us, and share with a friend so that the good news that is happening right here in our own midst can amplify even